What if 10 modern special operators were ordered to stop 10,000 ancient warriors? At first glance, the sheer math makes this sound entirely impossible. 10 men with assault rifles standing against an endless ocean of iron and flesh. But the grim reality of warfare does not care about impossible odds. Because when 10,000 men scream and charge, the earth physically shakes. And the scariest part is the terrifying, inescapable countdown of ammunition. What happens to modern gods when their magazines finally run dry? If you love realistic military what-if battles, subscribe to Clash of Eras Warfare before the first shot is fired. The setting is a crumbling, ancient stone fortress situated at the mouth of a massive desert canyon. The sun is rapidly setting, casting long, terrifying shadows across the endless dunes. A harsh, howling wind kicks up thick walls of sand, violently reducing visibility to less than half a mile. Inside the ruined walls stand exactly 10 elite modern special operators. They are cut off from the outside world, with zero hope of aerial extraction or resupply. They carry suppressed M4A1 carbines, 2 Mk48 heavy machine guns, and a finite stockpile of explosives. On their helmets sit 4-tube panoramic night vision goggles, a massive technological advantage as darkness falls. They are wearing state-of-the-art ballistic plates designed to stop high-velocity rifle rounds. But tonight, those expensive ceramic plates are practically useless against what is coming. Because marching toward their position is a unified army of 10,000 ancient elite warriors. This is not a disorganized barbarian horde. This is a disciplined, battle-hardened imperial army bred for absolute, merciless conquest. The front ranks consist of heavy shock infantry, carrying towering bronze-faced shields and 8-foot spears. Behind them are thousands of veteran archers, capable of blacking out the sky with heavy iron-tipped arrows. And waiting on the desert flanks are hundreds of heavy war chariots, designed to shatter defensive lines. The tactical disparity here is mind-bending. The 10 operators possess a combined rate of fire that could theoretically wipe out a small city. Their modern optics allow them to see thermal signatures through the howling sandstorm. Their encrypted tactical radios allow silent, instant communication across the defensive perimeter. But the modern squad is carrying exactly their standard combat loads, plus 3 extra crates of ammunition. That equals roughly 15,000 total rounds of 5.56 and 7.62 millimeter ammunition. Do the brutal math. That leaves a terrifyingly thin margin of error to drop 10,000 advancing bodies. If an operator requires 2 or 3 shots to kill a single shielded warrior, they will simply run out of bullets. The ancient commanders know nothing of firearms, night vision, or fragmentation grenades. They look at the crumbling fortress and see only 10 foolish men standing in their way. Their morale is absolute, driven by the fanatical belief that their emperor is a living god. They are completely accustomed to fighting in extreme, blinding desert conditions for days on end. They do not rely on fragile batteries, delicate optics, or complex mechanical supply chains. Their weapons are powered by raw human muscle, adrenaline, and unbreakable iron discipline. As the last sliver of sunlight dips below the desert horizon, the wind violently intensifies. The operators silently pull down their night vision goggles, bathing the desert in a crisp, glowing green. They immediately see the massive thermal heat signatures of 10,000 men bleeding into the night. The ancient army halts just outside the canyon mouth, exactly 1,000 yards away. Deep, rhythmic war drums begin to pound, vibrating through the ancient stone of the fortress walls. The sheer psychological pressure of 10,000 men chanting in the darkness is suffocating.
10 modern minds are about to test the absolute limits of their intensive psychological conditioning. Because technology is a massive force multiplier, but it cannot stop a tidal wave of flesh forever. The operators lock their heavy bolts to the rear and meticulously check their primary optics. The canyon creates a natural, fatal funnel, restricting the massive army from fully surrounding them. But the crumbling fortress walls are low, damaged, and offer very little protection from plunging arrow fire. If the operators let the enemy close the distance, they will be violently butchered in hand-to-hand combat. They must maintain total fire superiority and break the ancient army's will to fight from a distance. But how do you terrify an army that has never known a single defeat? The war drums suddenly stop, leaving a haunting, terrifying silence over the dark desert. A massive horn sounds through the canyon, signaling the terrifying beginning of the end. The ancient vanguard steps blindly into the pitch-black canyon. To them, the darkness is an impenetrable, blinding wall. But to the 10 operators, the desert floor is lit up like a bright green stadium. The squad leader gives the cold, whispered order over the encrypted radio net. 2 operators equipped with heavy, suppressed, designated marksman rifles fire first. The suppressed weapons emit nothing more than a sharp, mechanical hiss. 2 massive 7.62 rounds tear through the howling wind at supersonic speed. They instantly strike the 2 lead ancient commanders cleanly in the chest. Bronze breastplates cave in instantly under the massive kinetic energy. The commanders drop completely dead without making a single sound. Panic ripples through the ancient front line as their leaders inexplicably collapse. There are no arrows in the air, no flashes of light, no visible enemy. Then, the 2 modern heavy machine gunners squeeze their heavy triggers.
The twin Mk-48s violently erupt from the fortress walls in a synchronized roar. Tracers are strictly forbidden. They cannot afford to give away their firing positions. Invisible scythes of lead absolutely shred the ancient vanguard. Heavy bronze shields, designed to stop iron swords, explode into lethal shrapnel. Dense, disciplined formations turn into a terrifying, chaotic meat grinder. The sheer kinetic impact lifts heavy shock infantry entirely off their feet. Hot, thick blood instantly sprays across the cold desert sand. The agonizing screams of the dying finally drown out the howling wind. The ancient soldiers are completely paralyzed by the sheer psychological shock. They are being slaughtered by a deafening thunder that has no source in the dark. But an army of 10,000 does not rout after losing a few hundred men. The rear commanders scream harsh orders, beating the war drums with frantic energy. They order a massive, blind charge directly into the black throat of the canyon. Thousands of heavily armored warriors break into a dead, terrifying sprint. The modern squad leader calmly calls out target reference points over the radio. The 8 M4A1 carbines finally join the brutal, mechanical chorus. Firing strictly on semi-automatic, the operators aim for center mass thermal signatures. They are dropping ancient warriors at an absolutely terrifying, methodical rate. But the sheer, crushing weight of numbers begins to warp the battlefield geometry. The modern shooters must constantly reload, dumping empty magazines onto the stone floor. Every 3-second reload allows the roaring ancient wave to close another 50 feet, and the suffocating sandstorm is beginning to severely degrade their optical advantage. Blowing sand forcefully scratches the delicate lenses and blocks the thermal sensors. The massive, screaming horde aggressively closes the gap to exactly 600 yards. The ancient archers suddenly halt, draw back their heavy bows, and aim high into the dark. They cannot see the modern soldiers, but they know exactly where the ruined fortress is. The modern operators are about to completely lose their absolute monopoly on violence. Because gravity, numbers, and mass do not care about night vision or ceramic body armor. A terrifying hiss fills the desert air as thousands of iron-tipped arrows blot out the stars. The night sky suddenly rains a relentless torrent of jagged iron and heavy wood. The modern squad violently dives behind the crumbling stone parapets. Thousands of arrows brutally smash against the ancient masonry with a deafening clatter. Ceramic plates can stop bullets, but unarmored limbs and necks are completely exposed.
One operator violently curses as a heavy iron broadhead slices a deep gash across his forearm. The modern squad's flawless defensive line has just suffered its first physical bleed. They are forced to aggressively shift their fire to suppress the unseen archers in the dark. But the ancient warlords are far more intelligent than the modern soldiers anticipated. They quickly deduce that standing in tight, linear formations equals instant, explosive death. Harsh commands echo through the canyon, and the massive army drastically changes tactics. Thousands of warriors rapidly scatter into the dark, jagged rocks lining the canyon walls. They begin advancing in loose, erratic groups, violently minimizing the lethal kill zone. The modern machine gunners can no longer simply spray into a dense wall of helpless flesh. They are forced to actively hunt individual targets in the swirling, blinding sandstorm. Ammunition consumption violently spikes, while their kill ratio aggressively plummets. The howling wind whips up thick clouds of dust, heavily distorting their thermal optics. The glowing green figures blur and ghost, making it nearly impossible to track fast movement. And the microscopic desert sand is launching a brutal, silent assault on their modern weaponry. The fine, abrasive dust relentlessly works its way into open receivers and hot chambers. Suddenly, one of the heavy Mk-48 machine guns violently chokes and stops firing completely. A catastrophic double feed has jammed the weapon during a critical, massive wave of attackers. The operator frantically slams the charging handle, but the hot steel bolt is locked solid. That single mechanical failure instantly cuts the squad's heavy firepower entirely in half. The ancient warriors hear the roaring beast fall silent and aggressively surge forward. They violently close the terrifying gap to just 300 yards in a matter of seconds. The squad leader attempts to reallocate sectors of fire over the encrypted tactical radio net, but the towering canyon walls and heavy atmospheric static severely scramble the digital signal. Crisp tactical communication suddenly breaks down into completely garbled, robotic hisses. The 10 operators are rapidly becoming isolated islands of desperate, terrifying survival. Fatigue violently sets in as the massive recoil of continuous fire severely beats their shoulders. Their heavy, panicked breathing instantly fogs the eyepieces of their panoramic night vision. The overwhelming psychological weight of fighting an endless ocean of men is draining their sanity. Every moving shadow looks like a charging spearman. Every rock looks like a crouching archer. The ancient army is aggressively absorbing terrible losses just to bleed the modern squad dry. They are actively using their own slaughtered dead as gruesome, fleshy barricades against the gunfire. The modern soldiers are dumping empty magazines at a completely unsustainable, terrifying rate. If they do not drastically alter their defense, they will be out of bullets in 10 minutes. And the heavy ancient war chariots have finally maneuvered onto the flat desert floor. The heavy ancient war chariots accelerate across the flat desert floor like rolling thunder. These are not primitive carts. They are mobile shock platforms designed to shatter infantry lines. 2 heavily armored horses pull each chariot, while spearmen brace for brutal impact. The modern operators desperately focus their remaining Mark 48 fire on the charging beasts.
but the swirling sandstorm severely obscures the galloping targets until it is almost too late. The squad leader realizes that bullets alone will not stop the massive momentum of a dying horse. He screams a fallback order, physically grabbing his men and pulling them off the outer wall. The operators violently abandon the ruined parapet, just as the chariots smash into the stone. 2,000 pounds of horse, wood, and iron violently crash through the ancient masonry. The defensive perimeter is completely breached, opening a gaping hole directly into the courtyard. This is the exact turning point where modern technological supremacy violently collapses. Because an M4 carbine, firing 800 rounds a minute, still physically requires a human to pull the trigger. And a human finger can only move so fast when confronted with an overwhelming tidal wave of flesh. Thousands of ancient warriors pour through the shattered breach, screaming for blood. The operators retreat into the tight, claustrophobic corridors of the inner fortress keep. The engagement distance instantly shrinks from hundreds of yards to a terrifying 50 feet. The modern optics are now a massive, blinding liability in the extremely tight quarters. They violently rip the glowing green night vision goggles off their helmets to regain peripheral vision. The squad is now fighting blindly in the dark, relying purely on muzzle flashes and raw muscle memory. This is exactly where intensive, modern close-quarters battle training becomes their only lifeline. They form a flawless, overlapping wall of lethal firepower in the narrow stone hallway. Every single trigger pull dumps a 5.56 round directly into an ancient warrior's face. The ancient infantry physically cannot swing their long spears or heavy swords in the tight corridor. They are helplessly bottlenecked, getting violently slaughtered in the dark stone funnel. But the ancient warlords are ruthlessly sacrificing their own men to exhaust the modern squad's ammo. The ancient soldiers step on the slippery, bleeding bodies of their brothers just to advance 1 inch. Battlefield psychology dictates that extreme casualties usually shatter an army's morale. But these fanatical warriors believe dying in this fortress guarantees them eternal glory. That absolute religious fanaticism makes them far more dangerous than any modern technology. Suddenly, a heavy bronze javelin violently flies through the dark hallway.
It brutally pierces a modern operator's thigh, pinning his leg directly to the stone floor. He screams in agonizing pain, his rifle violently dropping from his hands as he collapses. The flawlessly synchronized modern defensive line instantly breaks apart. The ancient warriors roar in triumph, smelling the fresh blood of their seemingly invincible enemy. They violently surge forward, eager to tear the wounded operator apart with their bare hands. The modern squad leader realizes his team is seconds away from a brutal, horrific execution. He makes a desperate, incredibly dangerous tactical decision to save his bleeding man. He pulls a block of C4 plastic explosive from his vest and violently slaps it against the load-bearing pillar. He aggressively jams the blasting cap into the explosive and screams for his men to fall back. 2 operators violently drag their bleeding brother backward down the dark stone hall. The squad leader sprints after them, squeezing the remote detonator trigger without looking back. A massive, deafening shockwave violently obliterates the ancient load-bearing stone pillar. Tons of heavy masonry and crushed rock collapse directly onto the charging ancient horde. The ceiling violently caves in, creating an impenetrable wall of heavy rubble and choking dust. The brutal explosion permanently seals the narrow corridor, halting the ancient advance instantly. But the modern squad is now trapped deep inside the lightless bowels of the fortress. They are bleeding, completely exhausted, and down to their absolute last rifle magazines. The surviving ancient warriors outside begin aggressively scaling the ruined outer walls. They swarm the rooftop like angry insects, desperately looking for another way inside the keep. But the modern operators have one final, desperate tactical maneuver left to execute. They discover a crumbling, ancient drainage tunnel leading directly out into the desert canyon. It is a dark, suffocating crawl space, barely wide enough for a grown man in combat gear to fit. They drag their wounded teammate into the freezing water and begin to crawl in absolute silence. Above them, thousands of ancient warriors furiously tear apart the stone courtyard in pure rage. They scream in frustration, realizing their invisible prey has somehow vanished into the earth. Hours later, the 10 operators emerge miles away, vanishing safely into the deep desert night. They survived this absolute nightmare, but the terrifying tactical cost was incredibly steep. They abandoned their heavy machine guns, lost crucial gear, and nearly bled to death in the dark. They absolutely did not exterminate 10,000 men. They merely survived them. The ancient army suffered catastrophic, mind-bending losses in the fatal canyon funnel. But their sheer, overwhelming numbers ultimately broke the modern defensive perimeter. They violently forced an elite, technologically superior force to completely abandon their position.
Technology dictates exactly how many men will brutally die in the initial combat contact. But extreme logistics, finite ammunition, and raw human endurance decide who holds the ground. A modern rifle without bullets is just dead weight against a man who never stops marching. And in the end, the ancient army retained absolute control of the bloody, smoke-filled battlefield. The desert sunrise finally reveals the staggering, horrifying scale of the battlefield carnage. Thousands of dead ancient warriors lie shattered across the canyon floor and ruined courtyard. The 10 modern operators successfully escaped, surviving impossible odds through tactical adaptation. They inflicted casualties at a completely terrifying, apocalyptic ratio before slipping away. But the ancient army, despite their horrific losses, ultimately accomplished their objective. They successfully forced the technologically superior force to violently retreat and abandon the fortress. This proves that overwhelming numerical superiority can still exhaust finite modern ammunition. If the modern squad had been entirely surrounded, their technological advantage would have failed. So, does survival count as a victory? Or did the ancient numbers truly win the day? Could any modern squad actually hold ground against 10,000 fearless men without resupply? Comment your final verdict below, and subscribe to Clash of Eras Warfare for the next impossible, brutal battle simulation.